I remember the exact moment my future father-in-law looked at me across the kitchen island and said, with the kind of patience people reserve for children who don't understand something simple, "The thing about corporate law, Ren, is that it's not really something you can learn from a textbook." He had a glass of scotch in one hand, the other resting flat on the granite counter, and he was nodding slowly while he spoke. My boyfriend stood 3 feet away, very carefully not making eye contact with me. And I sat on that bar stool with my hands wrapped around a mug of tea that had gone cold 20 minutes ago, listening to a retired insurance adjuster explain the legal system to me. I'm a corporate litigation attorney. I'd been practicing for 8 years. My name was on 2 precedent-setting cases that year alone. But to understand how I ended up on that bar stool, you have to go back about a month. My boyfriend and I had been together for almost 2 years. We met when his firm brought me in to handle a contract dispute, which tells you something about how our relationship works. He is methodical and careful. I am direct. Somehow it functions. He'd been asking me to meet his parents since the previous Christmas, and I kept putting it off. Not because I was nervous, exactly, but because I knew enough about his family to understand that the first impression would matter a great deal. His father had spent 35 years working in insurance and considered himself an expert in anything that touched on money, liability, or the law. His mother was warm, organized, and deeply invested in the idea that her son had good judgment. Meeting them as just my boyfriend's girlfriend sounded manageable. Meeting them as a Bay Street litigator, which was how my boyfriend had apparently described me once in passing, had apparently caused his father to announce at dinner that he hoped she wasn't one of those aggressive types. I learned this detail a week before the visit. We were at my condo in downtown Toronto, making dinner, when my boyfriend set down the wooden spoon he was using to stir something on the stove and turned to me with the particular expression he makes when he's about to say something he's been rehearsing. "There's one thing I should probably mention," he said. I looked at him over the counter. "There's never just one thing." He exhaled. "My dad has some ideas about lawyers." "What kind of ideas?" "The strong kind." He picked the spoon back up. "He thinks the system is broken because of litigation culture. He blames class action suits for his old company's rising premiums." That's a fairly common opinion among people who haven't read the cases. "I know." He stirred the pot. "He also doesn't know exactly what you do." I set my knife down. "What does he think I do?" He had the grace to look embarrassed. I told him you work in commercial law. I left out the litigation part. "You left out the part where I am, professionally, his personal nemesis." I was going to tell him. I just wanted him to meet you first. I thought about that for a moment. I understood the instinct, even if the execution was questionable. When people hear litigator, they form a picture. When they actually sit across from you and talk, the picture sometimes changes. My boyfriend was trying to give his father that chance. "Fine," I said. "I can work with commercial law." He looked relieved. He's going to want to talk about the legal system. He always does when he meets someone in the industry. I'm sure I'll manage. He can be a little intense. I smiled. I cross-examine hostile witnesses for a living. I think I can handle Saturday dinner. He laughed, but there was something in it that should have told me he wasn't entirely confident. The drive to his parents' place in Oakville took about 40 minutes. It was mid-October, and the highway was that particular gray and gold that southern Ontario gets in the fall, the kind of light that makes everything look a little more serious than it actually is. My boyfriend drove with the radio off, which he only does when he's thinking hard about something. "You're quiet," I said. "I'm fine." "You've rechecked the mirrors 6 times in 20 minutes. He gave a short laugh. "My dad is going to want to debate you." "About what?" "Anything legal. He does it with everyone. It's how he tests people." He tests people. Not in a bad way. He likes to know where someone stands. He respects people who argue back. That's convenient. My boyfriend glanced at me sideways. Just maybe don't dismantle his entire worldview in the first 10 minutes. I'll save it for dessert. He smiled but didn't relax. The house was a red brick, 2-story on a quiet street, well-kept lawn, 2 cars in the driveway, a Canadian flag mounted by the front door beside a ceramic pot of late-season chrysanthemums. The kind of house that announces its owners have been there a long time and plan to stay. His father opened the door before we reached the step. He was a tall man, mid-60s, with the look of someone who had once been physically imposing and hadn't entirely let go of it. Silver hair, firm handshake, the kind of direct eye contact that comes from decades of reading people across a desk. "Finally," he said to my boyfriend. "Thought you'd gotten lost." "Traffic on the QEW." His eyes shifted to me. Quick assessment, top to bottom, the way people do when they're deciding something. "You must be Ren." "That's right. Nice to meet you." His handshake was brief and conclusive. "Come in." His mother appeared at the end of the hallway, drying her hands on a dish towel, and her whole face changed when she saw us. She had warm eyes and the particular energy of someone who considers feeding people an act of love. She hugged my boyfriend for a long moment, then turned to me with both hands out. "We've heard so much," she said. Come in. I've got dinner almost ready. Do you like roast? I hope you like roast." "I love roast," I said, and I meant it. The kitchen was large and clean, the kind of room that gets used seriously. There was a Le Creuset on the stove, a loaf of bread cooling on the counter, and a bottle of scotch open on the island beside a rocks glass that was already halfway down. His father poured himself a fresh glass and gestured toward the stools at the island. Sit. Your mother's almost done." We settled in. My boyfriend took the stool beside me. His father stood across the island, comfortable in his own space, the way men are when they've spent years being the most settled person in a room. "So," he said, looking at me, "commercial law." "That's right." "Corporate side?" "Mostly yes." He nodded. "Good money in that." "It can be," I said. "My son says you're with a Bay Street firm." He said Bay Street the way some people say it, acknowledging it but not impressed by it. I had some dealings with Bay Street lawyers a few years back, insurance dispute. I kept my expression neutral. "How did that go?" He gave a dry smile, the way those things usually go, expensive and slow. My boyfriend shifted slightly on his stool. His father continued. "That's always been my problem with the system. The people who know how to use it as a weapon. Regular people get caught in the machinery." "That's a real problem in some areas," I said. "Most areas." He sipped his scotch. "You work on anything like that? Contract disputes, that kind of thing?" "Some of that, yes. Contracts, business arrangements, that kind of thing." He nodded again. "I spent 35 years watching companies pay legal fees that had nothing to do with what was actually right and everything to do with who could afford to keep the fight going longer." He looked at me. "You ever think about that? Whether the work actually produces justice?" It was a genuine question. I could hear it. He wasn't trying to embarrass me. He was testing whether I had a real answer or just a professional one. "Yes," I said. "Often." He seemed to weigh that. "What do you conclude?" "That the system produces outcomes. Sometimes those outcomes are just. Sometimes they're the best available option under imperfect conditions. And sometimes they aren't just at all." He held my gaze for a moment. "That's an honest answer." "I try to be." His mother called something from the stove. He pushed off the counter and went to check. My boyfriend leaned slightly toward me. "That went well," he murmured. "We're 20 minutes in," I said quietly. And I was right to hold off. Dinner was set up in the dining room: roast beef, roasted potatoes, green beans with slivered almonds, a jug of water and one of juice, the scotch relocated to the sideboard. The table was oval and just large enough that no one felt crowded, which in retrospect made the conversation harder to escape. His father sat at the head. His mother sat to his left. I sat across from her. My boyfriend sat beside me. The first half of dinner was genuinely pleasant. His mother asked how my boyfriend and I had met, which led to a story that was both accurate and charming. His father talked about their youngest son who had recently moved to Calgary for work. His mother mentioned a renovation they were planning for the back deck. But halfway through the main course, something in the air changed. His father set down his fork with the deliberateness of someone who has been waiting to make a point. "You know what my real issue is with litigation lawyers?" he said, not meanly, almost conversationally. But the table became slightly quieter. "They're trained to win, not to solve problems. There's a difference." His mother looked at her plate. "Winning and solving aren't always separate," I said. "More often than not, they are." He looked at me. "You spend years in school learning how to argue, not how to understand what both sides actually need. Mediation, arbitration. Those are better models. But the legal profession doesn't incentivize them." "The billable hour is a real structural issue," I agreed. He seemed surprised I agreed. He continued, "And then there's the class action industry. People talk about it like it's justice, but half the time it's just a mechanism for law firms to collect 40% of a settlement while the people who were actually harmed get a check for $80. His mother said gently, "We don't need to relitigate the house insurance situation tonight, dear." "I'm not litigating anything. I'm making a point." He turned back to me. "You ever work on anything like that? Class actions?" My boyfriend cleared his throat. "I'm familiar with the model," I said carefully. His father leaned back slightly. "You know, I've met a lot of lawyers over the years, and the best ones, the ones I actually respected, were the ones who were willing to admit when a client didn't have a case. Who told them to settle rather than fight for 3 years and spend their life savings." "That's what good counsel looks like," I said. "It is, but it's rare." He was looking at me now with the full certainty of a man who believes he's imparting something useful. Most lawyers, and I say this respectfully, don't actually understand what's at stake for the person on the other side of the table. They understand strategy. They understand procedure. But the human cost? He shook his head. "That takes experience to see. Real-life experience, not just courtroom time." My boyfriend had stopped eating. His mother was very carefully buttering a piece of bread. "I think you're right that empathy takes time to develop," I said, "in any profession. Especially law." His father seemed pleased to have found common ground, because law has this tendency to attract people who are confident they understand more than they do. They graduate, they pass the bar, they think they know how the world works. He smiled slightly. It takes years in the real world to actually understand what the law touches. There was a pause. My boyfriend picked up his water glass and did not drink from it. His father continued, "Take commercial litigation. You'd think after a few decades, people would have figured out a more efficient process. But no. Every year, there are fresh, articling students who think they're going to revolutionize the practice, and every year the same inefficiencies persist." "Some things do improve," I said. Slowly, painfully slowly. He set down his own glass. "The fundamentals haven't changed because the incentives haven't changed. And until the profession is willing to seriously examine those incentives," he looked at me. "Well, it's not going to." And I say that as someone who spent half a career watching legal costs destroy otherwise viable companies. His mother said, very quietly, "Harold." He looked at her. "What? I'm just explaining how it works." "She works in law, dear." "I know that. That's why it's a useful conversation." He turned back to me. "No offense intended. You seem like someone who thinks about this stuff." "None taken," I said. Which was true, in the way that things can be technically true. My boyfriend put down his fork. "Dad, maybe we—" "I'm not saying anything inflammatory," his father said. "I'm saying the system has structural problems that most people inside it are too comfortable to address. That's just a fact." He looked at me again. "You'd agree with that, working in it?" The room was very still. I had been watching him for the last hour. Not with hostility. I want to be clear about that. He wasn't a cruel man. He was a man who had spent decades forming strong opinions based on real experience, and who had decided that I was a reasonably intelligent person from outside his world who might benefit from his perspective on it. He had never once considered that I might have more context than he did. And that, I think, was when I decided the conversation had gone far enough. I set down my own fork very calmly. You're right about the structural issues, I said. You're also right that it takes time to really understand what the law costs people. Both of those things are true. I paused. I've been working in commercial litigation for 8 years. I'm a partner at my firm. And the last 2 cases I led, one recovered $12 million for a pension fund whose administrator had been siphoning contributions for 6 years, and the other established precedent that's now being used in 3 provinces to protect small business owners from predatory franchise agreements. I looked at him steadily. I think about the human cost of what I do every single day. That's why I do it. The room stopped. His mother's hands went still on her napkin. My boyfriend stared at the table. His father looked at me, not with embarrassment, not yet, with the expression of a man whose internal file system has just been asked to process something that doesn't fit any existing category. You're a partner, he said. Yes. How long have you been practicing? 8 years. He was quiet for a moment. Then, those cases you mentioned, the pension fund one. The Meridian Trustees case, yes. It settled last spring. His jaw shifted. That case had been in the Globe and Mail. He recognized the name. I could see it in his face. The silence stretched. His mother said softly, "Harold." He looked at her, then back at me. Then he picked up his scotch, took a long, slow sip, and set it down. "Well," he said. No one reached for their food. My boyfriend finally exhaled. It was the kind of exhale that takes the weight of about 20 minutes with it. His father set his elbows on the table and looked at me with an expression that was somewhere between chagrin and something more honest than chagrin. "You let me go on for quite a while," he said. "You had a lot to say." There was a beat. His mother pressed her lips together, not quite smiling. "I was explaining litigation to a litigator," he said. "You were sharing your experience," I said. "That's not nothing." He shook his head. "That's generous." He sat back. "How long have you known about my opinions on class actions?" My boyfriend answered before I could. "Since last week when I told her you called her type aggressive." His father looked at him. "You told her that." "I told her you had strong opinions." "Right." His father looked back at me. His whole bearing had changed. Not collapsed, but recalibrated. "You came to dinner knowing I was going to do exactly what I did. I knew it was possible. And you didn't say anything." "I wanted to meet you as his girlfriend first," I said, "not as a credential." That answer sat in the room for a moment. His mother reached over and touched his father's arm. "That's actually very kind," she said quietly. He looked at her, then he looked at me. And for the first time since we'd sat down, something in his face became less certain of itself and more simply human. "You could have stopped me 20 minutes ago," he said. "I could have." "Why didn't you?" I thought about how to answer that honestly. "Because the things you were saying weren't wrong. They were incomplete. There's a difference." I paused. "And because you weren't trying to hurt me. You were trying to understand whether I thought about any of this seriously." He rubbed the side of his face. "That's a very diplomatic interpretation of what happened. I'm a lawyer. We're trained to find the most defensible reading." There was a silence. And then he laughed. Not a big laugh, a short, quiet one. But it broke the remaining tension so completely that even my boyfriend's shoulders dropped. "I suppose I owe you an apology," his father said. "You don't actually. I talked down to you in my own home. You talked at me. You weren't malicious." "No." He shook his head. "But I assumed I knew more than you did about a subject you've spent 8 years practicing professionally. That's—" He stopped. "That's embarrassing." His mother refilled her own water glass. "It's what you do, dear," she said pleasantly. "We've all just learned to wait it out." "That's not helpful, Sharon." "It's the most helpful thing I've said all evening." My boyfriend made a sound that was clearly a suppressed laugh. His father shot him a look. Then he turned back to me. "The Meridian case," he said. "The pension fund." "Yes." "That was you?" "Myself and a team, yes." He was quiet for a moment. "I read about that. I didn't realize." He stopped again. I'm sorry. That's the only honest thing I can say. I nodded once. I appreciate that. His mother stood to clear the first plates, and the movement broke the formality of the moment. My boyfriend stood to help her. His father stayed at the table, and for a few minutes it was just the two of us at opposite ends. He turned his scotch glass slowly in his hands. You really let me go on for an hour. You weren't wrong about everything, I said. The billable hour is genuinely problematic. Mediation is underused. Those things are true. But I was lecturing you about your own field. A little. He exhaled. God. He set the glass down. My son should have told me. He was trying to give you a chance to meet me without the interference of my job title. He looked up at me. Did it work? I thought about that. You know me a lot better now than you would have if he'd led with my CV. His father considered that. Something shifted in his expression. A kind of quiet acknowledgement. You're not what I expected, he said finally. What did you expect? He thought about it. Someone more defensive. Someone who would have corrected me the second I got something wrong. That's not always the most useful response. No, he agreed. I'm learning that. He picked up the scotch again, thought better of it, and put it down. Can I ask you something? Of course. Why commercial litigation, of all the things you could have done? It was a genuine question. I could hear the difference. Because the people in commercial disputes are usually not criminals, I said. They're businesses and individuals who made agreements in good faith and ended up in conflict. The law in those cases is genuinely trying to figure out what's right. And most of the time, there is a right answer. It's just buried under a lot of noise. I like finding it. He looked at me for a long moment. That's a good answer. It's a true one. His mother and my boyfriend returned with dessert, butter tarts, which felt like the most Canadian possible way to reset a dinner table, and the conversation moved into lighter territory. His father asked careful questions this time. How cases actually work, how long trials typically run, what the articling process looks like now versus 20 years ago. He listened. That was the difference. Earlier, he had been talking at me, deploying his experience like a set of facts. Now he was actually listening. After dessert, my boyfriend helped his mother with the kitchen, and I stepped outside onto the back deck. The October air had that specific sharpness it gets after dark in the lake region. Not quite cold enough for a coat, but clear enough to feel it. I could see the lights of the neighbors' houses through the trees. The door opened behind me. His father came out, his scotch relocated back to his hand. He stood beside me at the railing. Daniel comes out here to think, he said, which was the first time all evening he'd mentioned my boyfriend by name to me directly. I can see why, I said. He was quiet for a moment. We both looked at the yard. I've spent a lot of years being the most informed person in a room, he said finally. It becomes a habit. He turned the glass slowly. The problem with habits is they don't tell you when you're in the wrong room. That's a good way to put it. Sharon says I need to ask more questions before I start making speeches. He paused. She's been right about most things for 32 years. You'd think I'd have caught on by now? I smiled. It takes time. More time than I'd like. He looked at me. I want to ask you something else, and I want you to answer honestly. All right. Did Daniel tell you what I said about aggressive types? He told me you had reservations. His father winced. I said something worse than reservations. Yes. I'm sorry for that specifically. He turned toward me. That was before I'd met you. It was also before I'd thought for more than about 30 seconds about what I was assuming. Both of those things are my problem, not yours. I looked at him. Thank you for saying that directly. It's the least I can do. He sighed. You know, the best advice I ever got in my career was from a client, a 70-year-old woman who'd run a manufacturing company since her husband died. She sat across from me and said, before you tell me what you think, tell me what you know. I've been in the room with experts ever since, and tonight is the first time I forgot to do that. I nodded slowly. That's a good piece of advice. It is. He took a sip. I'm going to apologize again at the table before you leave. I want my son to hear it. and I want it to be deliberate and not just something I said in the dark on the back deck. You don't have to. I want to. He straightened up. Whatever you and Daniel are building, that matters to me. And that means you matter to me. Which means I can't start this off with a conversation I'm embarrassed by. I didn't say anything for a moment. Then, he's a good man, your son. He is, his father agreed. Better than me in a few specific ways, which I've never told him and intend to continue not telling him. That seems fair. He'd be insufferable. He turned and held the door for me. Come on, Sharon made coffee. Back at the table, with the dessert plates cleared and coffee cups out, his father put his hands flat on the table and looked at me directly. Before the evening ends, he said. My boyfriend looked up. I owe Ren a proper apology. His father was looking at me now. I spent most of dinner explaining her own field to her. I made assumptions about what she understood and what she didn't, and I was wrong on both counts. He paused. I'm sorry for that, and I'm glad you came tonight. His mother looked at him with an expression I recognized from couples who have been together long enough that a look says several sentences. She reached over and put her hand on his. My boyfriend exhaled for what felt like the 100th time. Thanks, Dad. Don't thank me for being decent, his father said. That's a low bar. His mother laughed, actually laughed, and somehow that was the thing that released the last of the tension from the room. We stayed another hour. His father asked about my family. I grew up outside Halifax. My father was a civil engineer. My mother taught at Dalhousie for years. He listened to all of it. When I mentioned a case I'd worked on in Quebec that required getting up to speed on civil law, he asked 3 follow-up questions, each one more specific than the last. He was, I realized, a man who was genuinely interested in how things worked. He had just spent decades assuming he already knew. When we left, his mother hugged me at the door and said, very quietly, "Come back, and next time I'll make something other than roast, so the whole evening doesn't feel like a formal hearing." His father shook my hand, firmly, like the first time, but slower, like it meant something different now. "I'll look up the Meridian decision," he said. "I'll send you the summary," I said. "The full text is about 400 pages. He smiled. I believe it. In the car, driving back up the highway, my boyfriend sat very quietly for a while. The city lights started appearing on the horizon, the CN Tower, a needle in the dark. Finally, he said, "I'm sorry I didn't warn you more specifically." "You warned me enough." I should have told him the truth before tonight. I thought about that. If you had, he would have been on his best behavior, we'd have had a polite dinner, and I still wouldn't know who he actually is. He was quiet. "And now you do." "Now I do. I watched the highway pass. He's stubborn, he's opinionated, he formed a wrong impression and dug into it for an hour." I paused. He also knew exactly what he'd done the moment he understood the situation, and he apologized for it clearly and without making it about him. I glanced over. That's not nothing. My boyfriend didn't say anything for a moment. Then, most people would have corrected him right away. Most people would have been right too, I said. But I was curious. About what? About whether he could change his mind. Another silence. Could he? He asked. I thought about the man who had held the door for me, who had made his apology deliberately and in front of his son, who had asked Sharon for coffee and then listened, actually listened for 45 minutes about a field he thought he'd already understood. Yes, I said, he could. People talk about moments like that one as if they're victories, as if the point is to be right, to be recognized, to make the other person see that they were wrong. But that's not actually what stays with you afterward. What stays with you is the moment when someone realizes they had a picture in their head that didn't match reality, and instead of defending the picture, they set it down. That takes something. Not everyone has it. I've spent 8 years in rooms where the entire point is to win, to build the strongest possible case and take it apart when it's someone else's. I'm good at it. I've never been embarrassed by it. But the moments I think about longest are never the ones where I won an argument. They're the ones where someone said, without being forced to, without public humiliation, without anything other than their own honesty driving them, "I was wrong. Let me try again." That's rarer than it should be. And when you see it, you recognize it and you don't forget it. His mother called the following week to invite us for Thanksgiving. His father apparently had already looked up 2 of my cases and had a question about procedural timelines. I told her we'd be there. There's a version of that dinner that ends differently. I correct Harold in the first 20 minutes, the table goes cold, and we drive home with something broken between Daniel and his father that probably doesn't fully heal. I've seen that version play out in other rooms, other situations. It feels satisfying for about 40 seconds, and then it just feels like wreckage. What I keep coming back to, months later, is how much of what happened that night came down to a choice I made before I even walked through the door. Not a strategic choice. I wasn't running a case. It was quieter than that. I decided to sit with discomfort instead of ending it. And that decision, more than anything I said or didn't say, changed what the evening became. I think about Harold a lot, actually, not with frustration, that faded fast, but with something closer to recognition. He'd spent decades accumulating knowledge and experience, and at some point that accumulation had quietly become a wall. He wasn't dishonest. He wasn't unkind. He had simply stopped leaving room for the possibility that the person across from him might know something he didn't. That's an easy habit to build. Most of us have some version of it. What surprised me was watching him dismantle it in real time. That takes a specific kind of honesty, the kind that costs something. It would have been so much easier for him to brush the evening off, to tell himself I'd misrepresented what I did, to find some way to keep his original picture intact. He didn't. He said, clearly and in front of his son, that he'd been wrong, that he'd assumed too much, that he wanted to try again. I don't think I would have respected him as much if he'd been right about everything from the beginning. What I've learned, and I mean learned slowly, over years, not from a single dinner in Oakville, is that how you carry what you know matters as much as what you actually know. Intelligence without honesty about its limits becomes something rigid and defensive. Discipline without humility becomes performance. And character, real character, isn't what you do when things are easy. It's what you do in the moment when you realize you've been wrong and no one is forcing you to admit it. Harold admitted it anyway. That meant something. And I think the reason I stayed patient through that dinner wasn't just training or strategy or some professional habit of staying composed. It was because I genuinely wanted to know who he was, not the version of him that performs certainty at the dinner table. The version underneath, the one who could change his mind, who could look at his own assumptions honestly, who could say to his son in front of everyone that he'd been wrong and that he was glad she came anyway. That version was worth waiting for. I think most people are, if you can hold on long enough to find out.